Hey guys, tonight we step through the heavy oak doors of a medieval feast hall where the air smells like roasted game, spilled wine, and just a hint of sweaty wool. You're not alone. There's a whole throng of you trudging across the rush-strewn floor, eyes wide as a line of servants march past, balancing absurdly large silver platters. Somewhere a lute hits a wrong note. The tapestries on the walls ripple faintly in the draft. And then it happens. They bring out the peacock. Yes, an actual peacock. Roasted whole, then redressed in its original feathers like a fabulous, slightly scorched runway model. Its neck curves delicately, its beady eyes somehow still judging you. And no, you probably won't survive this, either from food poisoning or sheer shock at how much effort went into something that tastes, frankly, like chewy turkey left in a damp cellar. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You inch forward and sit down on the wobbly bench, flanked by people in varying states of nobility and plague immunity. In front of you, a trencher. Not a plate. Oh no. A trencher is a slice of stale bread used as a plate. And once you're done with it, someone else, usually a beggar or your hounds, gets to eat the soggy result. Appetizing. The great hall is buzzing. A harpist plucks away in the corner, competing with a jester who may or may not be drunk already. As you look around, it's clear. This is no casual dinner. This is spectacle on a spit. A booming voice echoes across the hall, probably the steward, and suddenly the serving line begins. First up, a roasted peacock, not just cooked. This bird has been stuffed, baked, and then had its entire skin and feathers reassembled around it for dramatic flair. The beak has even been gilded with gold leaf. There's incense tucked in its throat so that smoke billows from its mouth. Very normal, totally appetizing. You slice in and it's fine. It tastes like gamey chicken, but drier. More show than substance. Still, the nobles nod solemnly as if eating something beautiful is more important than enjoying it. Historically, peacock was reserved for the elite. It wasn't eaten often because it was expensive, hard to catch, and difficult to cook well. But that was kind of the point. The medieval one-percenters weren't looking for comfort food. They wanted drama, spectacle. A centerpiece that said, yes, I own land, and no, you can't sit with me. And it wasn't just peacock. Crane, heron, and even porpoise made appearances at high-end feasts. Yes, porpoise, as in the aquatic mammal. Historians still argue whether this was out of genuine taste preference or just because the church declared sea creatures fish, and therefore okay to eat on fasting days. We're not saying it's a loophole, but it's a loophole. Beside your trencher is a goblet, not for water, of course, because medieval water was basically just cholera in liquid form. Instead, it's filled with a weak ale or mead, something safer to drink and strong enough to blur the flavor of overcooked bird. You glance down the table. A noblewoman is carefully dissecting a capon, a rooster that's been castrated to fatten it up. Yep. Castrated rooster. Supposedly more tender. And honestly, it's not bad, especially when slathered in a sauce so thick with spices it makes your nose sweat. Welcome to medieval seasoning. See, spice was wealth. The more cinnamon, cloves, ginger, or pepper a dish had, the richer the host appeared. Never mind that the combination could turn your stew into something that tasted like mulled socks. It impressed people. That's what mattered. Oh, and remember, no forks. Those are for the Italians, and even they get judged for it. Here, it's fingers, knives, and a communal napkin the size of a tapestry. Hygiene is more of a general vibe than a strict policy. As the servants bring out more courses, you notice something odd. The food isn't arriving in a sequence you'd expect. No starter, main, dessert logic here. Instead, roast meats, sweet pastries, and spiced fruits come tumbling in together. It's chaos. delicious buttery chaos. Someone next to you bites into a fritter filled with rose water and almond paste. Dessert? Maybe. Breakfast? Also maybe. The medieval menu doesn't care about your modern categories. If it's edible and decadent, it's fair game. And speaking of games, a plate arrives with what looks like chess pieces? No, those are sugar sculptures. Yes, sugar. Carefully molded into knights, castles, and tiny bishops. One of the guests actually eats the rook before realizing it was meant as decoration. Too late. You watch the sugar dissolve in his mouth like victory. Behind you, the doors creak open again. Another centerpiece. This time, a roasted deer, complete with antlers, posed like it's leaping across the table. They've even stuffed its mouth with apples and cloves to hide the smell. You're not sure whether to eat it or apologize to it. The longer you sit, the more overwhelming it becomes. Dishes keep arriving. Conies, that's rabbit by the way, stewed in wine, small birds cooked whole and piled high, fish that still have their heads and judgmental eyes. You reach for another goblet of ale. You're going to need it. Somewhere in the middle of this extravaganza, a minstrel begins a song about a knight who fell in love with a turnip. You don't ask questions. You just nod, chew, and remind yourself that you're here for the full experience. And just when you think the madness is winding down, a servant wheels out a massive pie. You brace yourself. Is it meat? Fruit? Custard? Number. It chirps. Because inside the pie are live birds. This isn't a joke. This was a real thing. A 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie situation. They'd hide the birds under a cooked crust so that when the pie was opened, the birds would fly out in a flurry of feathers and screeching to the delight or horror of the audience. Practical? Not even a little. Memorable? Oh yes. By now, you're sticky with grease, dazzled by candlelight, and genuinely unsure if you've actually consumed any nutrition, but you've definitely consumed something. As you lean back, dazed, another tray passes by. You catch a glimpse of a roasted pheasant, again, fully feathered, as if it just sat too close to the fire. No one blinks. You're starting to understand how they built entire identities around their food. Not just survival, but spectacle, power, status. A social game you had to chew your way through. And somehow, you kind of love it, even if you never want to see another bird again. Before you can wipe the pheasant grease off your fingers, another dish lands in front of you. This one shimmering with the strange, gelatinous wobble of something that definitely didn't exist on the food pyramid in school. You stare. It stares back. Or at least it feels like it does. This is aspic. Meat jelly? You poke it with your knife and it jiggles ominously like it's laughing at you in slow motion. Whatever meat lies inside, pigeon, fish, a whole rabbit, is trapped in a glistening cube of translucent horror. Think of it as medieval Jell-O, but made with boiled hooves, bones, and absolutely no fruit. It's cold, salty, and eerily smooth. And you're expected to eat it without screaming. To be fair, this stuff wasn't just weird medieval prank food. Aspic had its fans. The gelling process came from collagen released when boiling bones, usually veal or pig's feet. It was practical. It preserved meats longer in the absence of refrigeration, and the jelly layer protected the contents from air. It was even considered a sign of refined culinary skill. The clearer the jelly, the more advanced the cook. Though, honestly, when you're staring down a quivering tower filled with eggs, fish bits, and maybe raisins, your modern palate can't help but revolt a little. You take a bite. It's odd. Cold, savory, and vaguely meaty, with a texture somewhere between gummy candy and regret. Across the table, a nobleman devours his portion gleefully and wipes his hands on a spaniel's fur. You pretend not to see. Interestingly, aspic made its way through history and into the 20th century. Ever seen those cursed 70s cookbooks with olives floating in gelatin molds? Blame the Middle Ages. Historians still argue whether this culinary monstrosity was born from necessity, showmanship, or just centuries of unchecked boredom. A servant ladles more jelly onto your trencher. You try not to cry. You glance around for something more familiar, and that's when you notice a group of monks arriving late. Hushed, robed, heads slightly bowed. It's Friday, which means no meat, technically. But monks are clever. One plunks down a fish dish that smells suspiciously like sausage. Here's the thing. Medieval Christians followed strict dietary rules, especially around Lent and Fridays. Meat from warm-blooded animals was off limits. So they got creative. Really creative. That fish on the monk's plate? It's probably a fake-out, made from pounded almonds, breadcrumbs, spices, and fish stock, molded into something that looks like meat, tastes like meat, but isn't quite. Sometimes the deception was even more elaborate. Take the cockatrice. A bizarre culinary Frankenstein where the front half of a piglet was sewn onto the back half of a capon. A fattened, castrated rooster, then roasted and served whole. Because why not? You blink. A monk passes you what looks like a pie. Inside? Fish layered with spices, raisins, and saffron, masquerading as something decadent and meat-based. It's surprising. Good. Fishy, sure, but the sweetness from the dried fruit adds a complexity that's oddly satisfying. Still, you can't help but chuckle. These folks went to war for religion, survived plagues, and couldn't legally marry without permission. But they would not break the no meat on Friday rule. Even if that meant dressing up salmon like sausage and calling it holy. It's around now that a group at the high table begins to chant softly. You realize they're blessing the next course. That's when it hits you. This isn't just dinner. This is ritual. Every bite is bound up in faith, politics, class, and a deeply ingrained fear of eternal damnation by overindulgence. But also, indulgence. More fish arrives, and this time stuffed with herbs and laid out on a carved wooden platter shaped like a ship. Seaweed lines the sides like waves, and a lemon rests where the mast should be. It's art. If art were oily and smelled like brine. As you taste it, you catch whispers about fish days versus flesh days, a whole calendar of alternating dietary restrictions. The church dictated what could be eaten when creating a kind of rhythm that chefs had to follow, bend, or creatively bypass. One historian describes medieval cooking as a series of puzzles. How do we make dinner impressive, edible, religiously legal, and completely over the top at the same time? Turns out the answer was disguise everything and serve it with pride. You nod along politely as a young page offers you a goblet of Hippocras, a sweetened, spiced wine often served to cleanse the palate. It's warm, cinnamon-heavy, and immediately burns your throat. Palate cleansed. Brain, slightly fuzzy, you settle back, finally managing a breath between courses. That's when the jelly returns. Not aspic this time, but a fruit jelly molded into the shape of a castle. Walls, turrets, and all. Someone pokes it, and the drawbridge jiggles. It's weirdly adorable, and also still kind of terrifying. Across the hall, a noblewoman tells a story about a feast where the jelly contained small, edible gold coins. They gave them to children, she says, so the poor little things would find treasure when they bit in. You nod. It sounds cute until you realize she probably means actual gold, and maybe teeth. As servants collect the trencher plates, scraping jelly remains into buckets, you watch them toss the scraps to the dogs lying quietly under the tables. That's another medieval custom. Not only were trenchers reused, they were often given to the poor or to animals after the feast. It was a sort of proto-food bank, wrapped in grease and crusty bread. By now, the hall is thick with heat. The torches along the stone walls flicker, casting long shadows. You can hear the buzz of conversation about land disputes, marriage alliances, and how Sir Aldred accidentally married his cousin's cousin. Again, but you're still thinking about that first peacock. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds blur around you. Your tongue still tingles with cloves. Your fingers are sticky with wine and aspic. You can feel your heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of this ancient, absurd, strangely charming ritual. Because for all its weirdness, medieval food isn't just about survival. It's about identity. Drama, flex. Even within the jelly, especially within the jelly. The noise in the hall rises. Cutlery clinks against wood. Someone hiccups loudly. And a jester somewhere behind you lets out a belch that might have been choreographed. But you barely notice. You're still captivated by what just arrived at your end of the table. Another jelly, but not just any jelly. This one seems cursed. It glows faintly orange in the firelight, its translucent dome quivering like it knows things. Inside, you can make out slices of boiled meat, chopped herbs, and... Wait, is that a whole quail egg suspended near the center like a prehistoric mosquito in amber? This is aspic's sinister cousin. Meat jelly with a flair for the dramatic. Medieval cooks didn't stop at flavor. They went for vibes. And this one is giving haunted. You glance at the lord seated to your right, who slurps his portion cheerfully and proclaims, "Tastes like victory." You smile politely while trying not to think about the gelatinous nightmare sliding across your trencher. Aspics were used not just for preservation, but for performance. Some were shaped into animals, architectural wonders, even battleships. The noble goal? To blur the line between art and edibility. Historians still argue whether these were primarily practical or theatrical, though it's hard to imagine someone looking at a meat-filled jelly shaped like a cathedral and thinking, "Ah yes, this is efficient." But things get weirder. A servant arrives bearing a silver platter, and on it, what appears to be a roasted bird. But it's not a fresh one. It's several. Sewn together. Wings of a goose, body of a capon, head of a pheasant. Welcome to the grotesque genius of medieval illusion dishes. Culinary taxidermy designed to blow the minds of your guests and possibly traumatize a few children. You stare at it. It stares back. It's unclear who's winning. This dish is known as a sautelty, a whimsical, often bizarre concoction served between courses to entertain diners. Think of it as the TikTok filter of the medieval banquet, something to spark conversation, awe, and confusion. Sautelties weren't always edible either. Sometimes they were sugar sculptures or marzipan castles. Other times full-blown plays acted out in miniature scenes with food as props. And on certain occasions they were animals turned into strange hybrids and given names like cockatrice or Lèche Lombard. Elegant? Number memorable? Absolutely. The one you're staring at now is called a bastard swan. It's not on the menu because the menu is verbal and constantly evolving. But it's here, sizzling, looking like the result of a poultry-themed Dr. Frankenstein experiment. And somehow you're supposed to eat it. You do. It tastes like chicken. All of it tastes like chicken, except with more grease and a touch of guilt. Suddenly, the candles dim and a hush falls over the crowd. A procession enters the hall, musicians playing lutes and rebecks, servants in fine linen holding trays, and in the middle, two men carry something massive beneath a silver dome. The steward bellows, "The king's pie!" People clap. You do too, mostly out of fear. The dome is lifted, and from within the pie, a dozen live doves burst forth, wings flapping, feathers flying into people's goblets. The air fills with shrieks, both from the birds and the startled diners. A woman beside you ducks as one narrowly misses her powdered wig. Everyone laughs. This was planned. That's right, it's another sodal tie. 4 and 20 blackbirds, remember? The birds weren't baked into the pie, thankfully, but tucked beneath a hollow pastry shell. A literal showpiece that was more about optics than edibility. Though after the doves make their escape, what's left behind is a genuine meat pie. Possibly pigeon, possibly squirrel. You're honestly too tired to care. A server slices you a piece. It's piping hot, filled with hard-boiled eggs, dried cherries, and lumps of unidentifiable meat. It tastes like rich gravy and decisions you can't take back. Still, you chew thoughtfully. This is the height of medieval entertainment. Danger, drama, and dinner, all rolled into one. Across the hall, someone plays a hurdy-gurdy. The notes whine slightly out of tune, but no one seems to mind. A jug of spiced wine gets passed your way, and you take a long sip. It tastes like honey, cinnamon, and a mild concussion. Then, another marvel arrives. A swan. A flaming swan. It's roasted, its feathers reattached, and its body doused in brandy before being set aflame. The fire dances along its wings, casting shadows across the long table. You blink. You're not hallucinating. Yet. The flaming swan is carried around the room as a centerpiece before the fire is doused and the bird carved. It's not for everyone. The meat is tough, oily, and tastes a bit like pond water, but that's not the point. The point is spectacle. If you're powerful, you eat swan. You don't enjoy it, you endure it. Because enduring rare, tough, expensive meat is the noblest of burdens. Historically, swans were status symbols. Legally owned by the crown, they were marked like cattle and served primarily at royal feasts. Their preparation took days, and their arrival was designed to impress. You begin to realize in medieval culture, food wasn't just fuel. It was politics, performance, identity. It's also possibly the reason you're starting to see two jesters. As you finish your swan slice, chasing it with more hippocras because nothing else can mask the flavor of waterfowl, an elder at the table leans toward you and says, "Once at a wedding in Bordeaux, they served a roast ox with a pig stuffed inside, and a goose inside that, and a quail at the very center." You blink. "A meat turducken?" He grins. "A meducken." You're pretty sure he's making that up, but also, you believe him. Because this world of feasting has its own rules. A banquet is a stage, and every dish is a performance. The more absurd, the more legendary. People will forget your name, but they'll remember the pie that exploded into birds, or the aspic castle that jiggled like it had opinions. You lean back, fingers stained with grease and gold leaf, full of food that probably violated 3 modern health codes. And yet, you're enchanted. Because amid all the madness, the jelly, the taxidermy chicken hybrids, and the literal firebirds, there's something weirdly beautiful. Something timeless. And tomorrow, when you wake up craving toast, you'll think fondly of the swan you watched ignite like a feathery comet, sailing through the medieval night. You don't know what time it is, what course you're on. The wine's been flowing like a river in spring, and somewhere between the jelly with the attitude and the pie full of birds, time sort of gave up. All you know is that the air is thick with roast smoke, music, and the unmistakable scent of something new arriving. Something you can smell before you see. A silver tray comes into view, carried by 2 men who look slightly traumatized. On the tray, a boar's head. Real, full, fur still bristling, teeth still very much intact. And to really bring it home, they've stuck a gilded apple in its mouth. Because why not? The thing is, you've been vaguely prepared for odd food by now. But this is medieval centerpiece food. The boar's head wasn't just a meal, it was a statement, a flex, a warning maybe. Historically, the presentation of the boar's head was serious business. It often came out with fanfare, music, processions, maybe even a poem or two recited in its honor. One Christmas tradition involved singing an actual boar's head carol as the roasted beast was paraded through the feast hall like some kind of crispy, tusked celebrity. You lean in, its eyes are glassy, its ears slightly singed. The rosemary sprigs stuck behind its ears aren't fooling anyone. It still looks like it wants revenge. You take a small bite when the steward offers a slice. The meat is dark, rich, gamey, kind of like pork, but wilder, earthier. It's been slathered in a sauce made from vinegar, honey, and something aggressively herbal. It's not bad, if you don't mind your food looking back at you. Someone at your table mutters that this particular boar was caught near the bishop's land. Someone else insists it was hand-fed pears for a month. You quietly hope it wasn't the same pear you just ate. And this is where the weird garnishes start to show up. Beside the boar's head are things that don't seem like they belong with meat at all. Gilded nuts, gold-dusted fennel, candied citrus slices carefully laid out to make the boar look festive and oddly remorseful. A servant tosses tiny silver flakes across the tray for extra dazzle. This is food as theater again, and every performer gets a costume. Historians still debate how much of these outlandish garnishes were actually meant to be eaten. Some say they were edible luxuries, others argue they were symbolic, meant to show off the host's wealth and taste rather than please the tongue. Either way, it's a lot. And you've already eaten jelly, swan, and at least one bird hybrid. So at this point, your stomach's main emotion is confusion. A priest 2 seats over takes a bite of the apple in the boar's mouth. Someone gasps. Turns out that's not considered polite. The apple is mostly there to keep the mouth open and decorative, not for consumption, like putting a beret on a cat. It doesn't mean you should pet it. To wash things down, another jug of spiced ale gets passed your way. This one's got a stronger kick than the last, probably laced with ginger or wormwood. You sip cautiously. It burns like it has a grudge. As the hall claps and cheers for the boar, a second tray is placed beside you. It looks innocent enough. Pastry crust, steam curling off the edges, no visible animals or eyeballs. You breathe a sigh of relief. Then someone says, "It's a porpoise pie." You freeze. A what? Porpoise. As in, aquatic mammal. Yes, really. In medieval times, porpoises were considered fish by religious standards, meaning they could technically be eaten on fast days. And so they were. Often stuffed with eels, oysters, or even dried fruits. Not out of necessity, but out of a kind of ecclesiastical loophole and a chef's dark sense of humor. You pass on the porpoise pie, mostly out of fear. The guy next to you tries it and looks like he just solved a math problem and also witnessed a crime. Instead, you turn your attention to another peculiar offering being distributed nearby. Gilded eggs. Not gold-colored. Gold-covered. They've been hard-boiled, then wrapped in edible gold leaf, laid out in a nest of herbs and sprinkled with tiny pearls made from sugar. It's absurdly decadent. A chicken egg made to look like it belongs to a dragon. You take a bite. It tastes like an egg. But the gold clings to your lips and tongue like you're part of a Renaissance painting now. A person beside says, "You've been kissed by Midas," and offers you a napkin embroidered with someone else's family crest. Back in the corner, a minstrel is performing a tale about a knight who won a roast goose in a tournament of riddles. The punchline is terrible, but no one minds. You're too full, too warm, too slightly buzzed to protest. You glance around and realize that no two tables are eating exactly the same thing. Some have access to whole roasted deer. Others are nibbling on preserved fruits dipped in honey and wrapped in fig leaves. One group is eating something green and suspiciously slime-like. Another table is sharing a giant pie shaped like a shipwreck. Every dish is a little weird, a little overdone, and a little impressive. And every dish has one thing in common. It is designed to be remembered. A woman across from you offers a bite of her pheasant stew. It's been cooked in almond milk, spiced with cloves and saffron, and served in a bread bowl. You try it. It's soft, rich, sweet, almost like eating the savory version of bread pudding. She smiles and says it's her favorite. Better than porpoise, you reply, and she laughs. And that's the thing. For all the flaming birds, gold-leafed nonsense, and surprise pies, there's something weirdly communal about the madness. These feasts, strange and lavish as they are, aren't just about showing off. They're about sharing, about being seen, about being fed in the deepest sense. Food here is memory. It's celebration, it's ritual, and it's really, really weird. The boar's head is finally carried away, its apple replaced mercifully, its eyes closed with silver coins. Someone raises a toast in Latin, and you respond by raising your goblet of whatever this is. You're not fluent, but cheers feels universal. And just as you start to wonder if maybe this was the peak of strange medieval food, a monk wheels in something that looks suspiciously like a cheese round. You're not ready, but it's coming anyway. You can smell it before you see it. A low, creeping aroma wafts through the great hall, cutting through roast meat, stale ale, and singed bird feathers like a knight through a battlefield. It's sharp, earthy, and alive? You turn, squinting through the firelight. There, wobbling on a carved oak cart, is a wheel of cheese, round, cracked, and vaguely sweating under the heat. The monk pushing it wears a peaceful, slightly deranged smile. This, clearly, is his masterpiece. His moment. You brace yourself. Because this isn't brie. This isn't cheddar. This is medieval cheese. And medieval cheese did not come to play. The wheel thuds on the table in front of you. The top is cracked open like a treasure chest, and what emerges is, well, horrifying. The smell intensifies. You're hit with notes of old sock, ammonia, and a tang that makes your eyes water a little. This, dear listener, is likely the ancestor of casu marzu, the infamous Sardinian maggot cheese. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. Though it's debated whether this medieval version actually had live insects in it, historians are divided, probably for their own sanity. We do know that cheese back then was often fermented in ways that would horrify modern food inspectors. A noble across from you picks up a slice with a tiny silver knife, eats it, and sighs with pleasure. You gather your courage and cut yourself a piece. It's creamy on the inside, crusty on the outside, and tastes like someone tried to make yogurt in a thunderstorm. You nod politely. Your soul whimpers quietly. But weird cheese was a flex. Medieval lords prided themselves on having aged cheese so pungent it could legally be declared a weapon. The funkier, the better. Some cheeses were wrapped in herbs or ash, others left in cellars to mold slowly over months, sometimes even years. Monasteries were known for producing their own signature varieties, often fiercely protected like trade secrets. In some regions, cheese was used as currency. It could be traded, taxed, gifted, or hoarded during famines. One lord in France reportedly offered a wheel of prized sheep's cheese as a dowry. Romance, right. But cheese wasn't just for nobles, it was also survival food. A peasant's lunch might be a hunk of hard cheese, a crust of black bread, and a few onions. And they were grateful for it. In a world where most meat was seasonal, dairy, especially in solid, storable form, was life. Of course, not all cheese was cursed. Some were milder. Soft white cheeses made from goat or sheep milk, stored in clay jars or wrapped in grape leaves. But that's not what you're eating tonight. Tonight you are eating the wild child of the cheese family. The one who left home young, started a medieval rock band, and now smells like penance. The monk offers you a dollop of something else, runny, sour, and reportedly excellent with figs. You try it. It tastes like regret and unpasteurized adventure. Meanwhile, at the far end of the hall, another delicacy is making the rounds. Pickled fish. Small, bony, pungent little guys floating in a brine so strong it could clean armor. You pass. Instead, you reach for a modest-looking slab of bread, topped with... Is that jam? Nope. It's blood pudding. Because breakfast food, medieval style, hits a little different. Black pudding, made of pig's blood, oatmeal, onions, and fat, is served here not as a side dish, but as an actual course. It's been fried crisp on the outside and laid delicately on toasted rye. You take a bite. It's rich, salty, iron-heavy, comforting in a slightly concerning way. Someone beside you smiles and says, "It's good for the humors." You nod, pretending you know which ones. Blood was surprisingly common in medieval cooking. Nothing went to waste. When you butchered an animal, you used everything. The fat for candles, the bones for broth, the organs for stew, and the blood for sausage. Waste was not an option. Frugality, after all, was virtue, unless you were rich, in which case waste was performance art. You reach for a goblet of ale to wash it down and notice the rim has been dipped in sugar. Fancy. You take a sip. It tastes like spiced apple and whatever the medieval equivalent of Red Bull was. There's chatter now about what's coming next. Someone says eel, someone else says frogs. You brace yourself. Because medieval diners? They loved eel, especially in pies. Suddenly there it is, a tray carried by a boy barely old enough to lift it. A pie, oval-shaped, crust golden and glistening, with thin slivers of what you hope is onion poking from the vents. The steward announces it with pride. Eel pie. You resist the urge to run. Eel was common in medieval Europe, surprisingly plentiful, easy to store, when smoked or pickled, and considered an acceptable alternative to meat on fast days. In fact, some towns used eel as currency. Monks paid taxes in eels. Entire fisheries were dedicated to the slippery little guys. But the pie before you is not just practical. It's lavish. Stuffed with chopped eel, saffron, raisins, nutmeg, and herbs. You cut into it and watch steam curl up like incense from a pagan altar. You take a bite. It's not bad. The eel is soft, like mild fish with a hint of chicken, and the spices lift it into something weirdly elegant. The raisins throw you off, but not enough to stop eating. You look up, cheeks full of eel pie, and lock eyes with someone else doing the exact same thing. You both shrug and smile. Because this is the feast, it's strange. Unapologetic, sometimes revolting, often incredible, but above all, it's alive. The kind of alive that only comes from a time when survival and celebration were constantly tangled. A juggler tumbles past your bench, almost toppling a platter of pickled turnips. A drunk knight recites a love poem to his capon. And the monk with the cheese? He's passed out, smiling, one hand still resting on his masterpiece. You lean back, the taste of eel and honey lingering on your tongue. And somewhere deep in your overworked stomach, a cheese wheel rolls over and goes to sleep. You sit very still for a moment. Not because you're full, though yes, you are dangerously full, but because you're trying to figure out whether the stew placed in front of you is looking back. It's dark, brownish red, steamy. Floating in it are bits of something tender, something rubbery, and something that could either be a mushroom or a lung. You don't ask. You're too far in now. You've eaten swan, you've eaten gold, you've eaten jelly that had texture memory. There's no turning back. Welcome to the wonderful, chewy world of offal. That's right. Tonight's feature. Liver, lungs, kidneys, tongues, stomach linings. Everything polite society usually pretends doesn't exist. You spoon up a bite of the stew. It's earthy, rich, slightly metallic. Definitely liver. Possibly heart. The meat is soft, the broth thickened with bread and wine, and spiced with something that tastes vaguely like cloves and despair. You chew slowly. In medieval kitchens, nothing was wasted. The word offal literally comes from offal, referring to the parts that fall off during butchering, which peasants meant survival. For nobles, it meant exotic delicacies from parts of the animal you couldn't identify in polite conversation. Tongue, for instance, was considered a treat when boiled and stewed with herbs. And tripe, stomach lining, was often fried or served cold in jelly. Yes, jelly again. It always comes back. The pot beside you holds a meat pudding, a mixture of minced organs, suet, oats, and spices, all wrapped in a sheep's stomach. You poke it, it jiggles. You look around to make sure no one's watching, then try a bite. It's weirdly good. Chewy. Savory. Comforting in a way that makes you question your entire palate. A noble 2 seats over says the stew reminds him of the time he ate a goose's gizzard boiled in milk for 3 days straight. Another swears by fried spleen. Someone else asks if you've ever tried roasted udder. You have not, and you're not sure you ever will. But here's the kicker. Offal wasn't always poor people's food. In fact, certain organ meats were highly prized, especially when dressed up with expensive spices or buried in elaborate pastries. The difference was in the presentation, not the part. Historians still argue whether offal in feast was a sign of frugality or flamboyance. Was it about saving every last scrap? Or showing that you could turn even a cow's pancreas into a dish worthy of a royal table? Hard to say, but clearly both were true at different times, depending on your station, your kitchen, and your commitment to not wasting a single organ. A tray passes by holding something pink and oddly shaped. Sweet breads, someone says. You nod, pretending you know what that means. It's not bread, it's a gland, don't ask. Then someone tells the story of a noble in Burgundy who threw a 12-course banquet made entirely from offal. Dishes included stuffed duck hearts, calf's brain fritters, and a custard made with bone marrow and apricot jam. It was divine, they whisper, eyes glassy. You try to imagine it, you fail, you need a break. Something light, a palate cleanser. Instead, they bring out another meat pie. But this one is different. It's dusted with sugar, decorated with candied fennel and a glaze that shimmers like stained glass. It's dessert, you're sure of it. Until you cut it open and find rabbit. That's right, dessert meat. The pie is filled with tender rabbit. Dates, honey, saffron, almonds, and cinnamon. It smells like baklava and bites like roast dinner. Confusing, sweet, savory, strange. But that was medieval cuisine for you. The sweet and the salty constantly playing footsie under the table. There were no strict rules about flavor categories. A pie could contain both pears and pheasant. A custard could have fish in it. A tart might hide bacon under its berries. No one blinked. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger weren't just for dessert. They were used in almost everything. Why? Because they were expensive. And putting them in meat dishes, especially weird meat dishes, was a culinary power move. I can afford to make this rabbit taste like perfume, and you will thank me for it? You chew slowly. The rabbit is soft, almost melt in your mouth, and the raisins pop with sweetness. You find yourself weirdly impressed. Who knew this would work? Medieval cooks were masters of balancing flavors, and meat tarts were just one of many hybrid dishes they adored. Meat custards, savory puddings, even meat fritters dipped in honey and fried until golden. Everything was fair game, literally. The man beside you is eating something that looks like turnover. Lamb and plum, he says. Perfect for winter. You smile and wonder if modern cuisine just gave up halfway through history. You glance down at your goblet, still full. The wine tonight has been spiced, warmed, cooled, red, white, maybe both. You're not entirely sure anymore. You ask a passing servant what's in it, and he rattles off cloves, anise, cinnamon, honey, pepper, rosemary. And wine, he adds like it's an afterthought. You sip. It tastes like Christmas and sinus relief. The feast continues. You're full now, properly full, but you're also intrigued. Because each dish is a surprise, a gamble, a mystery wrapped in pastry and sprinkled with gold. And every time you think you've seen the weirdest food of the night, something new arrives. You look around the table. The guests are glowing, red-cheeked, bloated, laughing. The fire crackles. The musicians strike up a slower tune. Someone pours more wine. Someone else starts a story that ends with a chicken being knighted. And you take another bite of your sweet meat pie. Because why not? You're in too deep to pretend now. This isn't just a feast anymore, it's a delicious fever dream. You slump back in your seat, wondering how your medieval stomach hasn't filed a formal complaint. Around you, plates are scraped clean, goblets are refilled, and somewhere in the rafters, the birds from that earlier pie are probably still emotionally recovering. But the feast, it marches on. And this time, it's serving something that arrives with no warning, no ceremony. Just a quiet, oozing presence laid before you like a dare. A heavy slab of what looks like pudding? Except it's black, like black. You tilt your head, it shines slightly, and it's hot. Steam curls up from its sides like it's recently emerged from a medieval underworld. It's blood pudding, again. Yes, more. Because apparently, in the medieval world, one serving of coagulated pig's blood and oats simply wasn't enough. This version is richer, thicker, almost gelatinous at the center. The top's been seared, crisped, maybe even branded, and it's served with a dark onion gravy that smells like something your ancestors probably fought wars over. You glance at your neighbor's trencher. He's slathering his slice with mustard and smiling like his birthday. You take a breath, then a bite, and... okay, it's weird, but it's not bad. It's earthy, iron-strong, textured with oats, and has a weirdly homey comfort to it. The mustard punches through the richness. The gravy is sweet and sour. It's like the meatloaf of nightmares, but with heart. Literal, probably. Across the table, someone pipes up about the great breakfast feasts of noble households. They say the Duke of Bedford once broke his fast with 12 eggs, eel stew, and a pitcher of wine. Someone else nods, adding, and blood pudding soaked in ale for 3 days, served on a bed of roasted apples. You raise an eyebrow. No way. But it is the Middle Ages, where breakfast wasn't the polite cereal and toast affair we know today. For nobles and knights, breaking fast often meant diving headfirst into what most of us would consider dinner, with ale on the side. Sometimes beer, rarely water because, again, cholera. Peasants, on the other hand, weren't sitting down to duck egg omelets. Their morning meals were simple. Rye bread, maybe cheese or leftover porridge cold from the night before. If you were lucky, a bit of salted fish. If you were really lucky, no one stole your bread before you woke up. You sip a spoonful of the onion gravy on its own. It's oddly delicious, thickened with stale ale, a little vinegar, and probably more lard than should legally be allowed. Your arteries politely request a moment of silence. But even now, you can't stop thinking about breakfast, or at least medieval versions of it. You ask a nearby servant what the house typically serves in the morning, and she replies, boiled eggs, fried liver, blood cakes, spiced pottage, baked apples, and watered wine. You blink. That sounds more like a feast, but then again, medieval life was unpredictable. You might not have dinner, or tomorrow, so you front-load your calories just in case. This explains the enormous platters of sausages being carted in next. Oh yes, sausages. They're long, coiled like rope, glistening in grease and arranged like culinary scrolls of temptation. Some are dark red, blood sausage. Others are pale, peppered with herbs and mystery. A few seem to have exploded. No one cares. You fork a chunk and taste it. It's shockingly good. Spiced, smoky, almost sweet. Made with a blend of minced offal, fat, and herbs, and probably sealed in intestines because artificial casings weren't a thing yet. Medieval sausage making was an art and a survival skill. They were stuffed with anything edible: meat scraps, barley, onions, garlic, and whatever else wouldn't immediately spoil. Once stuffed, the sausages were smoked over open flame or hung to dry, preserving them for days or weeks. Historians still argue whether sausage recipes were closely guarded secrets or shared like gossip. In some noble households, the sausage master was as respected as the steward, which, let's be honest, is both weird and kind of iconic. You chew your sausage contemplatively. You wonder how many pigs were involved in tonight's menu alone. At least 5. Maybe more. And right as you're beginning to accept that pig might now make up 70% of your internal organs, a new dish lands in front of you. It's porridge? Yes. A thick, creamy, steaming bowl of pottage. A staple of medieval tables. But this one is different. It's not the thin peasant version made with leftover barley and turnips. No, this is feast pottage. Rich with marrow, garlic, leeks, and crumbled cheese. Possibly duck, possibly eel. You've stopped asking. You spoon some into your mouth and instantly, comfort, warmth, salt, fat, a flavor that feels like getting hugged by someone who smells faintly of smoke and rosemary. Pottage was the go-to meal of the Middle Ages. A slow-cooked stew or porridge made from whatever was available. It could be thin and brothy or thick and hearty, depending on the day. Everyone ate it. Nobles added saffron and wine. Peasants added hope. The man beside you tears off a chunk of dark rye bread and dips it in his bowl. Best eaten with your hands, he says. You follow suit. It's messy. It's hot. It's delicious. And at this point, you feel like you are the feast. No longer just a guest, but an actual participant. Grease-slicked, wine-warmed, and fully inducted into the medieval rhythm of eat, sip, laugh, repeat. You look around the room. Laughter echoes. Somewhere, someone plays a soft tune on a harp. A dog snoozes beneath the table, full of bones and dignity. The steward is shouting for silence before the next course. And you take another bite of blood pudding. Because somehow this is your life now. And honestly, you're not mad about it. You try to stand. Bad idea. Gravity suddenly feels optional. Your stomach sways gently like a ship anchored in gravy. You sit back down slowly, with dignity, with caution. Your feet may still be on the floor, but your soul is curled up somewhere in a pie crust. And then, as if summoned by your fleeting hope that the courses might be winding down, it appears. Eel. Again. Not chopped, not stewed, not disguised inside pastry. This time it's bold. Naked. Whole. Its skin slick and shiny, eyes intact, mouth slightly open like it's whispering, "You thought you were safe." The eel lies in a silver bowl, coiled like a serpent at rest. Poached in wine and herbs. A few sprigs of parsley lie across its body, as if that's supposed to make any of this feel normal. Across the table, a lady picks up her knife and begins filleting her eel with practiced elegance. You suspect she was born into this. You, on the other hand, stare at it like it just insulted your family. Still, you're intrigued. You've survived flaming swan and meat jelly that jiggled like it had opinions. You can do this. You carve off a sliver. The meat is soft, oily, delicate in texture, but strong in flavor. Somewhere between catfish and snake, if that's a flavor you're brave enough to imagine. It's not bad. It's not great. It's eel. And medieval diners loved it. Eel was cheap, abundant, and technically a fish, which meant you could eat it on fasting days during Lent, And in those awkward moments when the church said no meat, and your stomach said, too bad. There were entire eel economies. Monks paid taxes in eels. Peasants owed rent in eels. Some towns even had dedicated eel weighing stations. The Doomsday Book, that massive medieval land survey, lists eels as a currency. That's how seriously people took their slippy, wriggling, protein-rich noodles of the river. You look down at your plate. One eel coil is gone. Another remains, staring. Someone tells you, helpfully, that Henry I of England died from eating too many lampreys. Not quite eels, but close enough to make you slowly put down your fork. Still, the pie form was more your style. You think back to the eel pie from earlier? Wrapped in saffron-laced crust, filled with chopped eel, raisins, dates, a little vinegar, a little mystery. That pie worked. This question mark. This is the eel in its purest form. No apologies, no camouflage. Just eel, and yet it's almost comforting. You've seen it so often now, it's like an old acquaintance. The weird cousin of the medieval feast. The one who shows up uninvited, but somehow makes every party more interesting. The musicians start a jaunty tune. A few guests are clapping along, one's already on his third eel. You glance around the hall and realize, this isn't just indulgence, this is rhythm. A cycle, a tradition, and eel is at the center of it. The cooks used to stew eel with apples and onions, or roast it whole and serve it with vinegar and breadcrumbs. Sometimes it was pickled, smoked, even baked inside loaves of bread for transport. Portable protein. No refrigeration required. Just salt and hope. You try a second bite. Smaller. This one's better, more tender, more seasoned. You're starting to get it. Maybe eel is an acquired taste. Maybe you've acquired it. Or maybe you've just lost all sense of judgment. Either way, you chew. Nearby, someone loudly announces a poem in honor of eel. It's terrible. Rhymes eel with meal 5 times. People applaud anyway. You smile, you clap. This feast doesn't care if you love every dish, it only cares that you remember them. And, oh, you will. Because eel wasn't alone in the medieval waters. People ate everything they could net, hook, or spear. Pike, carp, perch, herring, sturgeon. Even whale sometimes if it washed up and no one was watching too closely. Monasteries often kept fish ponds stocked like larders. Towns had fishmongers whose stalls reeked gloriously of the sea. River fish, salt fish, dried fish, fish in paste, fish in sauce. So many fish, you start to wonder if the medieval diet was less land-based and more aquarium-adjacent. And yet, none seem to have the reputation of eel. Slippery, boneless, and mysterious, it made its way into noble feasts and peasant pots alike. Historians still argue whether eels were genuinely loved or just tolerated as the best of a weird aquatic bunch. Some suggest their popularity came from their texture, others from their symbolism. Sinuous, earthy, almost mystical. One thing's clear, the eel's reign was long and slimy. As your plate is cleared, you find yourself oddly nostalgic. You kind of miss it already. Not in a let's do this every day kind of way, but more like, I survived and I'd like credit. A fresh goblet of ale is passed your way. This one is darker, nutty, malty, thick as soup. It sticks to your teeth. You sip it like it's medicine, which, to be fair, it probably is. You lean back, finally feeling the slightest hint of fullness give way to fatigue. The fire crackles low. A few guests have begun to drift into private conversations. One man near you is asleep, head resting on a plate of dried figs. No one wakes him. You catch a whiff of rosemary and sage from the kitchen. New dishes are still coming. Of course they are. But right now, in this quiet moment between eel and whatever's next, you close your eyes for a second. Not to sleep, just to honor the eel. It came, it wriggled, it conquered, and somehow it became the star of the feast. You barely have time to say goodbye to the eel before something even more bewildering arrives. A bowl is placed before you, steaming, fragrant, and vividly purple. You blink. Purple soup. Not beet red. Not wine dark. Not this sat too long under the torchlight. Number, this is intentional. This soup is a rich royal violet, like someone melted a robe from the House of Lancaster and added broth. You stir it with your spoon, cautiously. The smell is pleasant, sweet, spicy, and a bit like cinnamon mixed with meat. You taste it. It's thick, almost gravy-like. Definitely contains some kind of poultry, maybe almond milk, and... Is that sugar? Yes, it is. Welcome to the deeply confusing, wonderfully bonkers world of medieval food coloring. See, medieval cuisine wasn't just about taste, it was about spectacle, drama, surprise. Meals were a performance, and every dish had to look like something more fabulous than what it actually was. Enter edible dyes. This purple stew probably dyed with turnsole, a pigment derived from lichens that changes color with acidity, or maybe sandalwood or elderberry skins. The cooks went out of their way to make this stew look like it had royal blood. And it wasn't just soup. Chickens were dyed blue. Eggs were painted gold. Custards were bright green. Even rice imported at great cost was sometimes tinted just to show off. You glance around. Someone's biting into a pie with a crust glazed in bright orange. Another diner breaks open a pastry to reveal saffron yellow custard, oozing out like it's auditioning for a medieval cooking show. Historians still debate the exact recipes used for these color transformations, whether saffron was wasted just for hue, or if beetroot and parsley juice were favored in poorer kitchens. But one thing is certain, color meant status. If you could afford to waste a rare spice or a dye just to make food prettier, it meant you were rich enough not to care. And yes, sometimes the dyes were less than safe. Take verdigris, for instance, made by scraping copper rust into a fine green powder. It gave dishes a bright emerald hue and a side order of slow poisoning. Perfect for when you want your jellied eel to say, "I'm gorgeous and I might kill you." No big deal. A new plate slides in front of you. It's a roasted chicken, or... is it? You slice in, and it's not chicken. It's veal. The outside's been painted with a mixture of egg yolk and turmeric to make it look like poultry. Your brain stutters, your mouth agrees. It's good. Rich, moist, tender, and your taste buds are now completely detached from reality. Welcome to Culinary Illusion 2.0. Feasts like this weren't just about eating, they were about experiencing. You weren't just a guest, you were an audience. Every course came with a reveal, a twist, a flavor plot twist. Just when you thought you understood your plate, it shapeshifted. One chronicler wrote of a feast where the fish arrived painted to look like roast beef, and the beef looked like fish. Just because. And if you're wondering, didn't people get annoyed by this? They absolutely did not. Because in the medieval world, food was entertainment. Cooking was theater. And sometimes the best compliment a chef could receive was a guest exclaiming, "What in God's name did I just eat?" You sip your wine again. It's sweeter now, more like syrup than drink. They've clearly moved on to the dessert versions. Cinnamon, cloves, maybe a hint of rosewater. Your lips stick slightly as you set the goblet down. And then they bring out something new. You hear the whispers before you see it. "They've done the golden chicken again," someone hisses. Golden. Chicken. You crane your neck, and sure enough, there it is. A roasted bird, fully feathered. Except the feathers are gold, not gold-colored. Actual gold leaf, painstakingly applied one shimmer at a time. It glows under the candlelight like a myth. You're not even sure it's edible anymore. It's become something else. a symbol, a flex, a monument to both vanity and incredible kitchen labor. The bird is wheeled slowly past the tables, a sort of edible parade float. People applaud. Some stand. One child faints, probably from hunger and awe. You ask your neighbor, "Are we supposed to eat it?" He shrugs. "If you can catch it before it flies off, maybe." You're joking, obviously, you hope. They do eventually carve the golden bird. It tastes like any other well-roasted capon. Tender, brined, with a hint of smoke and fat. The gold doesn't taste like anything, but it feels expensive, luxurious, like eating a crown, and that's the point. As the guests devour the shimmering flesh, you notice that no one even flinches anymore. Purple stews, blue eggs, gold birds. It's just another Tuesday in the Great Hall. You sit back, letting the chaos pass you by. It's beautiful in a way, silly, extravagant, joyful. Because when life outside these walls was brutal, famine, disease, war, taxes, inquisitions, maybe it made sense to turn your meal into something magical. To paint your food, to trick the eye, to play with expectations. You couldn't control the world, but you could at least surprise someone with a lavender stew. A juggler tosses apples across the room. One misses and rolls under your bench. No one cares. The band strikes up a tune that sounds suspiciously like Greensleeves, even though it hasn't been invented yet. And for just a moment, you forget the cold outside. You forget the damp stone walls, the questionable water supply, the total lack of forks. Because the chicken is gold. The soup is purple. And everything tastes like it was made by someone who wanted you to be amazed. You're not sure if the wine is getting stronger or if the food is starting to whisper to you. At this point, it could go either way. A hush falls over the feast, not out of reverence, but more like the hush of a room that has collectively hit its stomach's full to critical threshold. The music softens, and for a moment you wonder, is it finally over? Of course not, because here come the organ meats. Again. You glance down at the plate placed in front of you. A stew that seems innocent at first. Brown, glossy, aromatic. But one glance tells you this isn't your average beef stew. That's not beef. That's tongue. And that? That could be liver or lung. Possibly heart. Possibly multiple. You consider your options. You have none. So you take a bite. And it's not bad. In fact, it's deeply satisfying. The tongue is tender, almost silky. The liver is rich, almost chocolatey if you squint your soul hard enough. The broth has been thickened with wine and breadcrumbs, a little vinegar to balance the richness, and more nutmeg than should be legal. The cook who made this knows what they're doing. Medieval cooks had to, especially when working with offcuts, the parts of the animal that required finesse. Anyone can roast a leg of lamb, but turning kidney and lung into something worthy of a noble feast? That's art. And in the medieval kitchen, waste was not an option. Every part of the animal had purpose. Tails were fried, feet were boiled into gelatin, brains were baked into custards, and intestines washed, scraped, and used as sausage casing. Yay! Historians still debate whether nobles actually enjoyed eating organ meats or just tolerated them in the name of extravagance. Some argue these dishes were a flex. Look how refined I am. I can eat cow tongue on purpose. Others think it was simply the result of medieval chefs being too good at their jobs. Make anything taste amazing, and people will eat it, even spleen. You ask the man beside you what he thinks of the dish. Could use more spleen, he says. You're not sure if he's joking. Next up, a platter of minced pies. Small pastries packed tight with meat, sweet, dried fruits, wine, and spices. Basically the medieval version of protein bars. If protein bars had the texture of fruitcake and smelled like stew. You bite into one. It's hot, crumbly, sweet, savory, and completely impossible to categorize. It tastes like Christmas, and also like breakfast, with a faint hint of regret. They were originally called chewits, and they were popular across England and France, often made with beef or mutton, mixed with raisins, cloves, and cinnamon, all baked into a small pastry crust. Some even had fish inside. Nothing says holiday cheer like anchovies in a pie. But the real star of this course? Head cheese. Let's take a breath, because head cheese is not cheese. It is, in fact, everything but. It's what happens when you boil the head of a pig or a calf for hours until the meat falls off, and then set it in its own gelatin to cool into a loaf. Yes, that's a real thing. And no, it's not a prank. It was beloved. A slab is placed in front of you. You stare. It's mosaic-like. Bits of cheek, snout, maybe ear, suspended in a translucent meat jelly. You cut a slice. It shivers slightly. You eat it. It's salty, chewy, rich, oddly compelling, and again, completely normal by medieval standards. Head cheese was efficient. It used the whole animal, could be stored cold, and traveled well. Peasants made simpler versions with vinegar and onions. Nobles got theirs molded into beautiful shapes, sometimes shaped like animals or castles or coats of arms. You sip your wine. It helps. Just then, the servers arrive with another strange offering. Tripe fritters. Because of course they do. Tripe, aka cow stomach lining, is sliced, boiled, battered, and fried into golden curls. You try one. It's chewy, a bit rubbery, but the batter's delicious. You suspect it's the same batter they used for dessert fritters. Which brings you no comfort. Someone nearby asks the table if anyone's ever eaten lamprey and jelly. Someone else responds, once. At my cousin's execution banquet. You don't ask for details. There's something beautiful about how casually these dishes are treated. There's no snobbery, no wincing, just a cultural agreement that food is food. And if it's prepared with care, even brains and feet deserve their moment. And it's not just meat. A small ceramic bowl is passed to you, filled with something pale, cold, and creamy. You taste it. It's garlicky, slightly sour, with a crunch. You ask what it is. Almond milk blancmange with shredded chicken, the server replies. Of course. Blancmange, originally a pale pudding made with rice, almond milk, sugar, and shredded poultry, was a favorite among the sick, the wealthy, and the occasionally confused. It was gentle, software easy to digest, and somehow still involved meat. There were versions without meat, sure, but the highborn preferred theirs with a little chicken or fish. Because if it's not complicated and slightly unsettling, is it even a medieval dish? You spoon it slowly. It's soothing. It's confusing. It tastes like something your grandmother might make if your grandmother was also a court physician. As you eat, you overhear a conversation about a glorious pie that once contained a live rabbit, which leapt from the crust wearing a ribbon and a tiny note that said, "Eat me last." You desperately hope this is folklore. You suspect it is not. A toast is called. You raise your goblet, now filled with spiced ale that tastes like nutmeg and wheat. The candles flicker low. You can feel the warmth of the hearth, the weight of the food, the strange comfort of being fed things that no modern restaurant would dare to serve. And as the last bite of tongue stew disappears from your trencher, you realize you've stopped asking what things are. You've started enjoying them anyway. Because here in the flicker of torchlight, surrounded by nobles and jesters and cooks who turn stomachs into stories, you are not just eating, you are feasting. And you are all in. You think dessert is next. You hope dessert is next. You pray silently, reverently to whichever medieval deity is listening, that dessert is next. And then it arrives. A sugar-crusted tart, golden and glistening under the candlelight, is placed before you. It smells sweet, buttery, spiced. There's a drizzle of honey on the crust, and a dusting of what looks like cinnamon. You breathe in deeply, savoring the moment. Finally, a break from jelly meats and internal organs. A sweet ending. You cut into it. Inside is rabbit. You sit back. You stare at it for a long moment. Then you sigh. Because of course it's rabbit. This is meat dessert, a medieval classic. You take a bite, cautiously. It's good, really good. The rabbit is tender, slow cooked until it almost melts. The sweetness of the dried figs and honey balances the savoriness. There's a touch of saffron, maybe some ground almond, and, yep, a hint of rose water. You chew slowly. It's a surprise, yes, but not a bad one. Just confusing. You see, the medieval mind didn't separate sweet and savory the way we do today. To them, sugar and spice belonged everywhere. Not just at the end of a meal, but laced through the middle of it. Meat pies with fruit, custards with chicken, tarts filled with fish and sweetened with honey. This isn't a glitch, it's a feature. And in elite circles, sugar wasn't just an ingredient, it was a symbol. Imported at great cost from distant lands, sugar was exotic, expensive, and highly coveted. To serve it with meat wasn't strange, it was elite. A sign you could afford luxury upon luxury. You glance at the next dish being brought out. It's a jelly. Again. But this one is molded into the shape of a swan, tinted pale pink and topped with gold leaf. Inside? Diced veal and pine nuts. Why? Because someone said, let's make this bird-shaped pudding meatier. Historians still argue whether medieval desserts were meant to be pleasant or provocative. Some believe chefs delighted in fooling diners with sweets that weren't sweets, or meats that weren't meats. Others argue these recipes simply reflect a world less hung up on binary flavors, where a pie could be both dinner and dessert. Why not? A platter of fritters appears next. Crispy dough balls, fried golden and dripping with honey. You reach for one eagerly and then pause. They smell like onions, because they are onion fritters, dipped in saffron honey glaze. You eat it anyway. It's confusing, but delightful. Someone near you says, they're better with vinegar. You nod as if that clarifies anything. Then comes the true star of the evening, marchpane. You've heard whispers, and now it's here. Marchpane, an early version of marzipan, is made from ground almonds, sugar, and rose water. But tonight it isn't served as a simple treat. It's a castle, a literal edible castle, complete with almond paste battlements, sugar glass windows, and tiny marzipan soldiers perched on the turrets. There's even a moat filled with currant jelly. A small flag flutters from the top, painted with edible ink. You swear you see the cook wiping a tear of joy from his flour-dusted face. Marchpane castles like this were rare, even among the elite. They took days to construct and cost a small fortune in ingredients. But when they appeared, they stunned. This wasn't dessert. This was art. And to destroy it with a knife? A strange kind of honor. The host rises and makes a show of slicing off one tower, handing out the first taste. You get a corner of the parapet. Almondy, chewy, perfumed with rose water. It's delicious. Finally, something sweet that actually tastes sweet. More delicate sweets appear. Candied rose petals, preserved ginger slices, sugar plums. Yes, they're real. And tiny wafers flavored with anise and pepper. You try them all. Your mouth is a carousel of textures. Sticky, brittle, floral, warm. Then comes a curd tart with saffron and egg yolk. Its color is bright as the sun. Its texture silky. It's oddly savory. A custard, but not quite. You can't stop eating it. Next, a bowl of snow. Not actual snow, but a dish called snow. A whipped concoction of cream, egg whites, sugar, and rose water. It's light, fluffy, and topped with sprigs of candied mint. You eat it with a carved wooden spoon and feel, for the first time all night, refreshed. Someone hands you a candied fennel root. It crunches like sugar glass. You wonder if your dentist would approve. Then remember, dentistry doesn't really exist yet. You crunch louder. A servant offers dragées, tiny sugared seeds, some of which are oddly spicy. You chew one and it burns slightly. Someone laughs and tells you it's meant to settle the stomach. It does not. A dish of spiced wine is passed around. More hippocras, sweet and fragrant. You sip. It helps. Everything is softer now, hazy and gold-tinted. The wine is warm, your belly is warm, your soul is floating somewhere between candied eel dreams and almond parapets. And then someone passes around a silver platter with what looks like a very small pie. You take a piece. Inside? Venison. Of course, it's been stewed with pears and plums, baked into a crust dusted with sugar and crushed cloves. It's the perfect end to a medieval meal. Meat disguised as dessert. Dessert disguised as meat. No clear lines, no rules. Just layers of flavor, tradition, and chaotic culinary joy. You look around the room. Some guests are nodding off, full and flushed. Others are still nibbling, trying every last oddity. Someone is writing a poem on a piece of bread crust. Someone else is sleeping with their head in a bowl of preserved figs. And you? You're licking rabbit honey glaze from your fingers. You no longer care what's in anything. You've reached that special medieval food state. Full, slightly disoriented, and emotionally vulnerable to a marzipan tower collapsing. Because this isn't just a sugar course. This is a final act. A curtain call for a feast that's part theater, part endurance test, part culinary fever dream. And you've survived. You didn't even cry, except a little during the eel. Somewhere between the candied fennel and the marzipan moat, you start to realize you've lost track of how long this feast has lasted. Hours, days, centuries. You wouldn't be surprised if a monk burst in yelling that it's now the next holy day and you've skipped 5 mass services. And just when you think it's over, when your hands are sugar sticky and your jaws sore from chewing on centuries of tradition, it happens. The spice parade begins. The first thing you notice is the scent. It's not subtle. Someone in the kitchen just unleashed a jar of cinnamon that could knock out a small army, and it's not alone. Here comes nutmeg, clove, ginger, cardamom, saffron, black pepper, cubebs, spices upon spices, clouding the air like aromatic confetti. A page boy brings out the next course, what appears to be a roast quail in a sauce so dark red it's nearly black. The sauce glistens with oil and mystery. You lean in. It smells like wine and something sweet and hot. The kind of hot that builds slowly and then punches you politely in the throat. You take a bite, and there it is. Cinnamon, clove, pepper, and probably enough ginger to build a very angry gingerbread house. It's amazing. The spices don't just season the food, they transform it. The quail becomes more than quail. It becomes theater. Alchemy. A performance in your mouth. One that says, yes, this tiny bird was imported at great cost and bathed in flavor worth its weight in silver. Because in the Middle Ages, spices were literal gold dust, more valuable than coins. Wars were fought for cloves. Explorations launched for cinnamon. Marriages arranged and empires funded through the trade of saffron. To cook with spices was to flex. And tonight, the kitchen is doing push-ups on your plate. Another dish lands. This time, a stew of lamb and a sauce of saffron, vinegar, and pomegranate seeds. It's tart, bright, full of warmth and sunshine, and the unmistakable aroma of luxury. You can smell the money. Across the table, someone brags that their family has a spice cabinet larger than their stable. Another boasts that they once tasted a dish with real nutmeg, which in some places was worth more than its weight in gold. You glance down at your own stew. It tastes like something stolen from a royal vault. You wonder if your portion alone cost more than your house. If you had a house. Spices were the heartbeat of medieval cuisine, especially at feast. They didn't just add flavor, they added identity. Saffron turned rice into treasure. Clove turned bland pork into legend. And pepper? Pepper was practically its own currency. Some servants were paid in it. Some nobles hoarded it like diamonds. Historians still argue how widespread spice use really was. Some say only the elite could afford regular access. Others believe trickle-down spice economics made it possible for the middle class to get the occasional whiff of luxury. Either way, the rich, they flaunted it. You pick up a chunk of bread, dark, dense, sour, and use it to mop up the last of your sauce. The saffron stains your fingers yellow. You smile. Then the next spice bomb arrives. It's a rice dish. Pale gold, flecked with raisins and slivers of almond, sweetened with honey and, perfumed with mace. Not the pepper spray, the spice. It tastes floral, nutty, a little overwhelming, but also kind of perfect. A woman across from you dips her bread into a bowl of clove gravy. A man to your left stirs his wine with a cinnamon stick so thick it could double as a cudgel. Another guest casually mentions that the king's personal chef once made a pie using 21 different spices. The tongue never recovers, he says proudly. You sip another goblet of Hippocras, spiced wine again, this time heavier on the ginger. It burns just enough to remind you you're alive. You catch yourself wondering if your bloodstream is now 40% cloves. Probably. No regrets. A server walks by with a jar of preserved cherries steeped in wine and pepper. You grab one. It's sweet, sharp, and just a little wrong. Like cherry pie and mulled wine got into a fight, and both won. Then comes the comfit train. Sugar-coated seeds, herbs, and nuts designed to settle the stomach. They're like medieval Tums, but prettier, and tastier, and possibly still full of pepper. One guest crunches on a fennel comfit and says, "Cleanses the humors." Another chews a candied anise seed and mumbles, "Good for the spleen." Everyone here seems to have a favorite spice. You're becoming partial to nutmeg, which shows up in nearly everything. It's in the meatballs, the pies, the drinks. You've chewed on enough of it to see through time. There's laughter now, louder, looser. The feast is hitting that golden hour when bellies are full, cheeks are flushed, and spices are turning everyone into part-time philosophers. Someone declares that cinnamon is proof of God's mercy. Someone else declares that saffron smells like victory. A third says nothing but cradles a bowl of peppered lentils like it's a newborn child. You smile. Because you get it. This isn't just seasoning, it's celebration. It's the glitter in the medieval kitchen. The stardust that turned turnips into temptation and fish into festival. And amid all the fire and chaos of life in the 1300s, maybe a spoonful of clove was all it took to remind people that the world could still be dazzling. As the final dish of the course is placed in front of you, a glazed duck breast crusted with cumin, coriander, and cinnamon, you realize you've reached the crescendo. The moment where spice stops being an accent and becomes a main character. You eat. Slowly. Reverently. And for once, nothing is disguised. Nothing is jelly. Nothing is purple. It's just duck. Spice like a dream. You're floating now. Not metaphorically. You're genuinely unsure if your body still obeys gravity or if you've transcended into some higher medieval plane where everything smells like cumin and your fingers are permanently glazed in honey. And yet, the food keeps coming. A procession of servers glides by, each one balancing yet another tray, and with it comes a growing sense of dread and awe. Because the next phase of this never-ending medieval marvel isn't just one last bite. It's the feast that never ends. Yes, you heard that right. They call it entremet, a term that loosely translates to between dishes, though calling it that is like calling a fireworks show a few sparks. These are palate cleansers, side amusements, edible spectacles, and full-on performance pieces. served while the kitchen prepares even more food. Your first entremet? A roast piglet, posed like it's mid-leap, with gilded hooves and tiny banners sticking out of its bag. One of the banners reads, "Fortune smiles on the hungry." You aren't sure if that's comforting or deeply threatening. The piglet is crisp-skinned, tender, and glazed with a sauce that tastes like plums, mustard, and a long walk in the woods. You eat cautiously while watching the next arrival. A pie the size of a small wagon wheel is rolled out, and as the top crust is lifted, surprise, it's filled with tiny meatballs, each one dyed a different color, and skewered onto a sugar stick like meaty lollipops. Because why not? A minstrel announces the dish as the jewels of the king's table. You eat a red one. It tastes like lamb and cinnamon. You eat a green one. That one? Minted veal. You skip the blue. Something about a blue meatball just doesn't sit right. From across the hall comes the sound of gasps. You turn and witness a parade of roasted birds. Each one smaller than the last, arranged in a row from goose to quail. One noble claps, in delight as the final tiniest bird, possibly a sparrow, is served to him on a single slice of toasted brioche. This is the nested bird course. And yes, it's a real thing. Cooks in the medieval period loved this stunt. You'd stuff a pigeon into a chicken, then the chicken into a duck, then the duck into a goose, then the goose into a pig, then the pig into whatever was big enough to house all of them. It was a carnivore's Matryoshka doll, and it was glorious. Historians still debate if these nesting meat monstrosities were practical, or just a culinary dare taken too far. Some think it began as a food preservation technique. Others believe it was simply what happens when bored rich people and ambitious cooks have access to a lot of poultry. You chew on the edge of a sparrow leg crostini. It tastes like just because we could. More dishes appear. Roasted peacock tongues and saffron jelly. Turtle eggs stuffed with almond paste. Boiled pears dyed green and stuck with clove-studded raisins to look like little hedgehogs. Someone passes around a dish of laughing beans. Dried broad beans soaked in wine and honey, said to inspire mirth and improve the humors. You pop a few in your mouth. They taste like sweet hummus with a personality disorder. The hall is loud now, abuzz with chewing and laughter and songs that keep going long after their rhymes have collapsed entirely. A man recites a tale about a feast where each dish was served in the shape of a famous saint. You don't believe him, but you also can't rule it out. You sip more Hippocras. The warmth settles behind your eyes like a velvet curtain, and then a murmur passes through the room. The feast is not ending exactly, it's shifting. A man with a scroll announces, "The final table." You watch as servers clear plates, wipe surfaces, and begin placing a long wooden plank down the center of the hall. On it, tiny bowls. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Each filled with something different. This is the ending wave. The final surge of dishes before guests begin dozing off under the tables, and someone's dog becomes unofficial ruler of the feast. The bowls contain preserved fruits, clotted cream, honeyed chestnuts, vinegared eggs, dried apples soaked in wine, walnuts rolled in sugar, lavender-cooked lentils. Why? No one knows. Each dish is small, a spoonful here, a mouthful there. You move slowly, reverently. This is the feast saying goodbye. One tiny, syrupy kiss at a time. One of your favorites? A warm milk pudding thickened with breadcrumbs, sweetened with honey, and topped with, of course, black pepper. Because no part of this feast wants you to get too comfortable. You watch as guests take bowls gently, one at a time. Some sniff them first, some raise them in toast. A few slip them quietly to their lapdogs. No judgment. At the far end of the table, a boy is lighting small candles and placing them in mounds of sugar. The flames flicker, illuminating the bowls like little altars, a final act of reverence for the absurd, chaotic, utterly glorious celebration that has unfolded across the night. And still,